We have more people coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who are here and online, if you will take a moment to breathe, to allow yourself to become grounded and centered. And from that place of being centered, to focus on your intention for today. I always like to add to my intentions whatever is for my highest good and greatest joy. It takes us out of that egoic mind when we add those few words. So first of all, we want to thank Urban Sanctuary San Jose for this beautiful space to be able to have the symposium this year, for Smeta for planting the idea of having a West Coast version. Am I too close? And I want to thank Smeta and Tiffany for being wonderful partners. What a lesson it's been for me to be open to receive such wonderful help. So thank you both so much. And to all of our speakers for being so willing and ready to share their energies, their wisdom. You are in for such a treat. I just can't even begin to tell you. I've been following all of our speakers for many years, and that they all said yes. And at this particular time, I just feel like it's such a blessing. So you have your intentions? All right, let's help anchor your intentions. Let's do an invocation. Take a breath. That word inspire means to take in spirit, because we are spirit. So tap into the divine within you. Tap into it and let it radiate out from your heart center to every cell in your body, filling you up with light and love. Now let it expand beyond your body, touching your neighbor, filling this room and this Zoom room that we're creating. We are creating a sanctuary across the world. Light and love fills us, overflowing. It opens our hearts to receive. It takes us beyond time and space into areas of truth. And in this place, we invite our teachers, our ancestors, our guides and angels, celestial beings, to hold the energy for us, for our greatest good and highest joy. We are open to receive on so many levels. It may even take years to process some of the things that we will receive. All is in divine order. Knowing this, we say, we stand believing, and we give thanks. And so it is. Now I would like to introduce our MC for today, our partner, Tiffany Hansen. Come on up, please. She's going to introduce our first speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, hello, and thank you everybody for coming today. We're very excited to have you here online as well as in person. Chris Bache has had a 20-year journey with LSD, and he has dramatically expanded his understanding of reincarnation. He is a professor by day and a psychonaut by night. And he spent most of his life between the world of academia and psychedelic exploration. So he's trained as a philosopher of religion, and he became convinced early in his career that psychedelics represented a revolution, not only in psychology, but philosophy as well. So Chris is a professor emeritus at the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University in Ohio, and he's an adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And he's an emeritus fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences and on the Advisory Council of Grof Legacy Training. So his books include Life Cycles, Dark Night, Early Dawn, The Living Classroom, and LSD and the Mind of the Universe. For more information, you can go to chrisbache.com and learn more there as well. Without further ado, Chris Bache.
Hello, everybody. Am my sound coming through okay?
One-
All right. Now let's hope that it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Carol for the invitation to spend this time with you today. It's wonderful to be in a room with so many people who care about reincarnation, who understand reincarnation, and are living within a worldview where reincarnation is a simple, natural fact of life. So I want to start with a short PowerPoint series of slides, just to sort of set a context for my comments. So let's see if the technology gods are going to be good to us today. Let's see if this works. Yeah, so far, full screen. Okay, is that coming through properly? Just seeing a nice big screen? Okay, good, good. Now, I know that I am speaking to many reincarnation therapists in the room, and what a privilege. And I'm not sure exactly how what I'm going to share with you would impact how one does therapy in working with past lives. But I thought, let me just go into it, and then you can tell me how this works within your world. Now, because my work comes out of a psychedelic experience, what I'm going to be sharing with you is not a series of ideas so much as I'm going to be sharing with you some experiences which have shaped my understanding of reincarnation. And to sort of get things warmed up, I'd like to begin with, here we go, with simply some pictures of our precious universe. That's a reminder that what we're really trying to do is understand the creative intelligence that brought our universe into existence, that gave birth to our galaxy, and to our solar system, and to our planet, and to life on this planet, and into reincarnating life on this planet. And we're really trying to sort of stretch our mind, to let our mind, our thinking be informed by the creative intelligence that gave birth to the universe, and well as giving birth to us inside this magnificent living universe, the scale of which is hard to fathom. A light year travels 6 million miles in 1 year, and we're looking at phenomena here that are millions of light years across. And when we look deeply into our universe, what we're seeing here are not just stars, we're seeing whole galaxies, each of them with billions and billions of stars. That is the context of our inquiry today. To appreciate the profound creativity, the generative creativity of the universe as we try to figure out what it's doing with us, what are its plans for us, what is its intention for us, and what is it creating? What is it creating inside time and space that might be of use to it and of interest to it, as well as sharing its being with us? So coming back here now, I'd like to sort of just tell you a little bit about how I got here, just to give a context for the thoughts that I'll be sharing with you today. I was fresh out of graduate school in 1978, and I met the work of two people who changed the course of my life. The first one was Ian Stevenson, whom I'm sure you all know, and this book turned my life around because it convinced me in one reading that reincarnation was simply a fact of life, and nowhere in my graduate education had this been taken seriously. And then, of course, Stevenson went on to publish a long series of very important books in which he provided empirical evidence documenting the phenomenon of reincarnation in the lives of young children who have spontaneous memories of their previous life. And then once I made this pivot and I began to study past life therapy and began to encounter the works of Roger Woolger and Winifred Lucas and other early past life therapists, eventually I wrote my book in the field, Life Cycles, Reincarnation of the Web of Life. And this, as you can see, was a long time ago. 33 years ago now. And the book still kind of continues to sort of spread around the world. It's got multiple languages going. But this was kind of my first, Life Cycles was my response to Ian Stevenson. And the second person who shaped my life deeply was Stanislav Grof, the founder of one of the co-founders of transpersonal psychology and the foremost authority in integrating psychedelics into psychotherapy in the early years. And his book, Realms of the Human Unconscious, along with Stevenson's, represented a major jolt and turning point in my life, followed by his book and methodology, LSD Psychotherapy. And I became convinced, and this again was 1978, I became convinced that it was really important for philosophers of religion to follow this work so that we could begin to speak out of an experiential basis, not simply a theoretical basis. So Stan had differentiated between two modes of doing psychedelic therapy: low dose psycholytic therapy, high dose psychedelic therapy. And I came along and I thought, well, if you could do, it's very different, low dose, peeling away the layers of the unconscious, layer by layer by layer. Psychedelic therapy, very different. The attempt here is to catalyze a profound experience to give a person something approximating a near-death experience. This was work that was being done in the early years with people who were terminally ill, to give them a taste of where they were going when they would die in order to reduce their death anxiety. And I thought, well, if you could do psychedelic therapy safely 3 times, and that was the limit in this early work, doing it 3 times, you could do it safely more times. So what I ended up doing was 73 high-dose LSD sessions between 79 and 1999. And this is a protocol I don't recommend today. I worked at 500 to 600 micrograms, which is an extremely aggressive protocol. I would do it differently if I were starting over again today. But as it was, I followed the same protocol, same set and setting, tried to standardize as many variables as possible so to create a stable encounter with the larger consciousness that I was entering. And when I got to the end of this work, I realized this was different than psychedelic therapy. This was not what happens if you only do this 2 or 3 times. And so I came up with the word psychedelic exploration. Now, the protocol is psychedelic therapy, and you're lying down, eye shades, headphones, carefully calibrated music. You have a sitter protecting you, taking care of you. The difference between psychedelic therapy and psychedelic exploration is the number of sessions. In my case, 73 sessions. Now, people work with psychedelics for many different reasons. One reason is personal healing, psychotherapeutic healing. The second reason, a different reason, is spiritual awakening. I found that my work really went beyond those two categories. It really involved a systematic cosmological exploration. So psychedelic exploration for me is an exploration of our cosmos. So at the end of my journey, when I was writing this up in my book, LSD in the Mind of the Universe, but my name for the book is Diamonds from Heaven, I identified 5 fundamental levels of consciousness that I had entered in the course of this work. One was personal mind, one was the collective mind, archetypal mind, causal mind or causal oneness, and the diamond luminosity. And so then, just to give you a context for my thoughts I'll be sharing with you today, running through the chapters of the book. And at this point, in the material covered in these first 5 chapters, I stopped my work. I had been working for 4 years. I had done 17 sessions, which is a substantive piece of work. If I had stopped my work there, I would have stayed largely within the framework of much transformative, transpersonal psychology. But I didn't stop there. After 6 years, I resumed my work for very intense years, covered in these chapters in the book, a deepening communion with the universe, going through many cycles of death and rebirth. One is not given these blessings without paying the price. And the price is just a repeated emptying at deeper and deeper levels, first ego death, and then deeper forms of dying as you enter deeper and deeper levels of cosmic reality. And the material I'm going to speak to you about today really comes from these chapters in the book. There were a series of visionary experiences that I was given that began maybe almost 10 years into the journey, when I was working at the level of archetypal reality and continuing systematically through up to the very end in this chapter called The Final Vision. And I would emphasize that the core focus of what I'm going to be talking about today really kind of culminates in this: the birth of the future human. That humanity is in the process, or nature is in the process of bringing forward a new form of human consciousness. The question becomes, what is the nature of this form and how can we get there? So, with that as background, I'm going to return to this, and I'm about to turn off my PowerPoint. But before I do, I'd like to give you just one more image. Just as when we move into space, all the details of our individual lives and our local neighborhood begin to fade into the background, and we begin to see larger and larger patterns of our beautiful planet. And the same thing happens in deep psychedelic journey and any deep spiritual journey. You can move farther, deeper and deeper and deeper, so that the individuals eventually disappear, and you begin to see and experience larger patterns of nature that don't cancel out the individuals, but they contextualize individual existence within a larger pattern of existence. Okay, now I'm going to stop this. So the first theme, collective reincarnation. The way we usually think of reincarnation, the way the story is usually told, and it was a story that I told in Life Cycles, is that we think of reincarnation in terms of the individual, the evolution of the individual soul. So the vision is that our essence is the essence of the divine. The essence of the individual is the essence of the totality. Atman is Brahman. But the essence is developed individually. It goes through a long, long series of incarnations in which the soul challenges itself, makes mistakes, fixes those mistakes, learns new skills, expands its capacities, becomes more and more complex, more and more subtle, more compassionate, more intelligent, so on and so forth. But the way we usually think about this is in terms of the dynamics of choice and the consequences of choice, karma and vipaka. And we mark the evolution of the individual soul. And very seldomly do we discuss collective reincarnation, except as it occurs in very small family units or people who are caught in a collective tragedy. What I would like to do is invite you to see a larger perspective. And to do that, I'd like to just share with you a pattern that began to emerge in my sessions. When I entered into archetypal reality, I began to leave behind deeper and deeper levels of my personal reality, going deeper into an encounter with cosmological archetypes. And then I dropped down to a little bit lower level of archetypal reality, and I began to experience the human species as a single organism. If you can just experience an organism where every human being is a cell in this larger organism, that all of our individual minds were sparks of light within the vast field of light that is the species mind. And in that context, I was dissolved repeatedly into the species mind. And I was being given all sorts of lessons of how the species mind functions as an integrated whole, and how our lives were part of it, and how every issue we were dealing with in our individual life was part of a larger pattern of issues being dealt with in the species' larger collective life. And then to get closer to the topic of reincarnation, I began to have experiences of experiencing reincarnation, not as a collection of individuals going through time, making choices, evolving themselves individually, but I began to experience the entire human species incarnating periodically, just a pulse of incarnation, billions and billions of souls incarnating as an intelligent manifestation of a deeper pattern of the species soul incarnating. And I dissolved so deeply into the species soul that individual souls disappeared. Our individual stories kind of disappeared as discrete, separate units. And what happened was I began to experience the life of the species soul growing, challenging itself, evolving itself, nature evolving itself in this particular species, and doing so in the form of manifesting these billions and billions of precious cells with their individual stories, growing, challenging themselves. But all of our individual stories were part of our larger species stories, and our individual challenges were part of this larger challenge. What I experienced just took my breath away. It radically expanded my understanding of the intelligence of the universe that had created this system, a brilliant system, not only for evolving individual human beings, but for evolving this entire species, moving through history, moving through time. It was so beautiful, it took my breath away. And it was to experience this unified being that we are all part of was both an ecstatic, mystical experience, and it was also a devastating experience, because what was devastating about it was to realize that the convulsions that individuals are going through, that history was going through, were not simply our private story, that they were part of this larger collective story. It was just beautiful beyond words. And I did not feel compromised in any way when I began to see the collective patterns manifesting in my life and in the lives of people around me. I did not feel manipulated. I did not feel that my free will had been compromised. I was simply seeing what had always been the case. We have always been distillations of the fabric of our species story. And of course, our species story is a distillation of the fabric of the Earth story, which is part of this fabric of our solar system story, our galaxy story, ultimately, which is part of the universe's story, which is part of the divine unfolding over eons and eons and eons in time. But just as we are a manifestation of the divine intelligence, our species is a manifestation of the divine intelligence. And what happened in this process is that the line between personal karma and collective karma became radically transparent to each other. So the idea became that it is impossible to isolate personal karma from collective karma. The collective karma of our species set up the conditions within which we experience personal karma. And the learning and the growth which we undergo by embracing our personal karma and becoming larger than our past feeds back into the collective psyche, so that when we grow, it grows. As it grows, it challenges us to grow individually. The dynamics of collective reincarnation. And this became the core theme of my book, Dark Night, Early Dawn. The core theme in that book is that we have to expand the story of enlightenment, because there is no such thing as individual enlightenment. The story of individual enlightenment is a radically and profoundly incomplete story. Nature does not think in small patterns. It does not think in small units. It does not think only in terms of the individual, the evolution of individual sparks of divine light. Nature is trying to evolve and awaken our entire species. Usually in spiritual traditions, the awakening of the species is such a massive undertaking that it is usually thought of being as beyond the pale of discussion. So they tend to restrict the discussion to the awakening of the individual. Less awakening the individual. That's something we can get our hands on. But in my book, Dark Night, Early Dawn, I was really trying to articulate a larger vision. And there I talk about the dark night of the soul. My concern is not the dark night of our individual soul.
Okay.
It is the dark night of our collective soul. It is understanding that we are coming to a turning point in history, and in that process, we are purifying and purifying and purifying.
Operation.
Okay. Is there some sound in the background? Okay. All right. And the species soul is coming into a similar time of collective awakening. And as part of that collective awakening is going through a process of profound detoxification, purification, a dark night of our collective soul, so that individual karma, individual enlightenment, collective karma, collective enlightenment are seen as simultaneously part of the same process. So that's kind of the first layer discussion I'd like to share with you. And so I'll pause. If I were in a room, we were live, we would take some questions on this. So we're going to I'll ask you to collect your questions and bring them into the discussion at the end. And I'll try to allow a little bit more than 15 minutes for us to go into a dialogue, a question and answer dialogue about these things. And now I'd like to sort of pivot to the related topic of the birth of the diamond soul. The way I discussed reincarnation and the patterns of reincarnation in life cycles is the way it's usually discussed in the spiritual traditions. The idea here is that we begin very simple, maybe even very primitive. By incarnating again and again and again, we grow, we become gentler, we become more compassionate, we become more intelligent, we become larger and larger. We kind of open up the first chakra of survival, second of pleasure, third of power, creativity, compassion, creativity, spiritual awakening, and unity. And as we open up these chakras, we become a more evolved spiritual being until eventually we come to that breakthrough realization that our essence is the same as the essence that runs through all of life. It is the same as the essence that is the source of all of life. We wake up spiritually and we understand and know, perhaps for the first time, who we are, what we are. And in classical spiritual circles, in the traditions and the cultures that have taught reincarnation for generations, what happens then is that now we can leave the world of time and space. Now we can leave samsara. In Hindu tradition, the name given for this awakening experience is moksha. Moksha means escape. Because when we awaken to our spiritual identity, we not only escape some ego, we escape samsara, we escape time and space, we return home to where we came from. In all of the religions that were born in the axial age, the basic pattern that emerges is that we achieve some type of spiritual breakthrough, enlightenment, or salvation. We achieve some type of spiritual culmination. And at that point, we leave time and space and we have earned the right to enjoy parinirvana, final nirvana, or the garden, or heaven. We move from a physical, challenging vale of tears to a pure land paradise. All salvation, the fruition takes place off planet in spiritual bliss. These systems, and I understand them, I really do understand the theologies of them, the philosophy of them, but they leave unanswered a fundamental question. What is the purpose of space-time to begin with? What is the purpose of physical existence? Is it really just a veil of tears that we're trying to get beyond? Is it really just something that we have fallen into by some spiritual mishap and we now are stuck in this swamp of physical reality and we have to grow and grow until we can eventually get ourselves out of this swamp and return home? As long as we were thinking of the universe as relatively small and relatively short-lived, a few thousand, a few tens of thousands, a few hundreds of thousand years, this might be an acceptable theology. But now that we're beginning to understand and see how big the universe is, how vast it is, and how old it is, and how much complexity is built into it, these up and out cosmologies just don't seem to satisfy. They don't seem to make sense as an interpretation of what the intention of the divine is in manifesting time and space. I say these things as background to sharing with you something that happened to me about halfway through my journey in the 38th session, in a session in which I experienced what I came to call the birth of the diamond soul. So let me just take you, if I can, into a piece of this experience. It was a very difficult session. It involved a great deal of cleansing and deep purification, deep disorientation, deep surrender, until eventually I went through a crisis and a transition and was spun into the most sublime paradise, just an extraordinary paradise. And I felt all my leftover desires and unfulfilled pieces of hurts or wishes just fall away. I had entered what I think Buddhism would call the deity realm, a high level of the bardo, a deity realm of extreme bliss, of extreme joy, just of wonderful cosmic celebration. And in this context, and after being in this context for maybe an hour or so, a deeper transition began to take place, and I began to go even deeper into the universe. And I began to experience all of my former lives coming into me. Now, I had done a number of years of past life therapy during that 6-year period while I was working on life cycles. I had done 3 years of past life therapy. I was familiar with some of my former lives, had done the usual things, the house cleaning work we do when we encounter our former lives with unfinished business. But this was kind of a larger scope. My former lives were coming into me, and it was like wrapping string around a kite spool, just one life after another. And as these lives came into me, I was being lifted into a quieter and quieter level of cosmic existence. It was like I was being taken home, and I was being taken home not as Chris Bache, but I was being taken home as my soul with all these former lives being integrated around the center of my core. And when I reached a point where all of these lives, first as they came together, there was a purification process, but then they began to become more integrated. And when they became deeply integrated, they began to move as one. And at that point, they fused. They fused into one entity, into one consciousness. And at that point, this explosion of diamond light exploded out of my chest, and I was catapulted deeper into communion with the divine than I had ever been taken before. I was an individual, but I was an individual beyond any frame of reference that I had ever experienced before. The way I would language this now is that this is what I experienced as the birth of the diamond soul. And the diamond soul is simply a way of languaging that point in an individual's evolutionary time when all of one's former lives come together and they fuse and they become one. And when they become one, a form of life is generated which is higher than anything which could be realized by individual egoic existence, even an individual enlightened existence. This was something different. This is the birth of a higher order of intelligence. if I put this experience, well, let me back up. In the context of this experience, I was given many teachings that I had been given over years of work. They were all coming together, teachings about what the purpose of time and space is, what the purpose of reincarnation is. Because as I was getting into the quieter and quieter levels of existence, there was both a sense of return to source, return to where I'd come from, and also a sense of what had been accomplished in reincarnating all these many, many times. And it gave me a sense of a story of what the purpose of time of incarnation is, what the purpose of reincarnation is. Now, as a philosopher of religion, I've read many interpretations, attempts to understand and interpret what the purpose of reincarnation is. But in general, I have not found these to be very satisfying, because usually I find that they often focus on one stage of the journey, which is relevant to the author, but they overlook other stages of the journey which are relevant to other people's lives, and they don't adequately reflect what is taking place, what is the purpose of the entire journey. And here in this session, this intelligence that was teaching me was basically giving me the best I could take in of what the purpose of repeated incarnation was. And it wasn't what happened in any individual lifetime. In essence, when you break it down, when you go beneath the individual stories of pain and breakthrough and spiritual growth, the underlying dynamic is learning how to create inside the context of space and time. Our nature is pure divinity. Pure divinity has enormous capacity to create. When we incarnate, we manifest a portion of our creative capacity in the life that we have lived. And when we live lifetime after lifetime and take on one course of learning after another course of learning, we are in essence manifesting our creative capacity to give ourselves deeper and deeper lessons, richer and richer lessons in the time-space environment. Matter has no capacity to act independent of the animating presence of consciousness. And our souls are manifesting the lives that we are living inside time and space. And once again, everything we are doing individually is a fractal iteration of something that the species is doing collectively. The entire species is evolving in this process. As it was given to me and as it entered into my heart and has stayed ever since, the purpose of reincarnation was to refine the art of creating so that we could create consciously instead of unconsciously, that we could create out of the depth of our soul instead of out of our personal unconscious, so that we could create in a way which was transparent to the divine intention at this point in history, at this point in our evolutionary story. If we put together the image or the idea of collective reincarnation with this idea of, or the experience of the birth of the diamond soul, the birth of the diamond soul is not simply a private story. It's not something which is happening to just a bunch of individuals. It's happening to every one of us. It's happening to every human being on the planet. Every human being is part of an evolutionary process in which I think we are coming to in history, we're coming to a decisive turning point, a challenging turning point. We are trying to give birth to the diamond soul in history. The human species is pushing against the limits of its evolutionary past and is gestating and giving birth to the next iteration of its evolutionary form. I think we've been, and this is what I call the birth of the future human. I think we are coming to a point in history where we no longer can afford the luxury of trying to run this planet acting out of a level of consciousness of the ego, even a compassionate ego, even an enlightened ego. And ego gets a bad rep in spiritual press. To me, the ego is a beautiful, magnificent aspect of creation, but still it's limited. It's cut off from other beings. It's cut off from other species. It's cut off from the universe at large. And I don't think we can afford to live on this planet out of the level of evolutionary intention of individual body-mind egoic existence. We have to grow up if we're going to face the challenges that are coming. And we're just seeing the early stages of the challenges that are coming. In my experience, from a visionary perspective, the 21st century will be a time of intense anguish. It will be a time of profound unraveling, of profound undoing. Just as when you do spiritual practice, you go through a process of ego death, the culmination of a collective dark night of the soul is a collective awakening. But before a collective awakening can take place, there must take place a collective death, a collective surrender, a surrender to an old way of being, a surrender to an old set of values, an old set of principles, values which divide between people, values which divide one religion from another, one class from another, one nation from another. We need to grow into the soul's perspective. And the soul lives in history completely differently than an individual egoic existence does, because the soul has been all of these races through time. The soul has been rich and poor, artist and soldier. The soul has been every color. The soul has been every religion, has lived on every continent. When the soul begins to bring together all of its former lives and begins to bring them into an integrated whole and give birth to its fully awakened consciousness inside the body, inside time and space, this represents, I think, a turning point in human history. And this is the turning point that we're coming to. Now, many past lives therapists, Michael Newton, for example, have demonstrated, have shown us that the identity that we resume when we die is the soul. We return to that larger consciousness that holds all of our former lives in its expanded consciousness. So the rhythm of reincarnation is we die and we return to the soul, to the large consciousness. Then we incarnate and we contract into a small consciousness. And we die, we expand into a large consciousness. We incarnate, we contract into a small consciousness. And the small consciousness grows, surely. The small consciousness becomes more and more, surely. But if we keep this up, if we keep this expansion and contraction process up long enough, doesn't it make sense that sooner or later, it results not just into an awakened individual in a small sense, but sooner or later, the soul awakens inside the incarnation. Not just for a few individuals here and there, but for the entire species awakening to this soul on earth. And a species which awakens to its soul consciousness lives on this earth differently than a species that lives within body, mind, egoic awareness. Because when the soul awakens, the memory of all of its relations comes back to us. The understanding of the depth of relations, the compassion of all of its learning comes back to us in our incarnate form. All the longing, all the spiritual longing, all the realizations, all the partial realizations come to a massive fruition. And we live on earth as the being that previously we only lived in between our incarnations in the bardo. The birth of the future human. Gestation is long, labor is quick, short. Nature has been gestating the future human for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. It's been evolving us and preparing us for this transition for thousands of incarnations. Labor is a dangerous time, a time of intense suffering, and it's ultimately, comparatively speaking, short. Water breaks. This is a day which is not like other days. This is a very intense time of giving birth to some profoundly new life. I think the human species has come into its labor. It's coming into the labor. The consciousness, the being that it's trying to give birth to, is the next iteration of human consciousness. Just as there was a time in our past where suddenly humanity began to develop a brain size that was 50% bigger than it had been before. Nature gave us this larger brain, and it did so rather suddenly. Likewise, in evolutionary time suddenly. Likewise now, nature, I think, is taking humanity into a labor in which we are being stripped of the values of our past. We are being initiated into the birth of something extraordinarily new. I think that the transition that we are going through represents not simply the birth of a new political order, a geopolitical order, not simply the birth of a new technology, but a profound spiritual rebirth. And even a spiritual rebirth doesn't say it quite right. We have to language it differently. A spiritual birth, giving birth to something which has not existed before. I think what's happening is nothing less than a shift in the plate tectonics of the collective psyche. This is something which is taking place at a very, very deep collective level. The structure of the collective psyche is changing. It's entering a time where it's flipping, it's inverting. My understanding is that every human being, every child that's born in the future, after we go through this transition, will be operating out of a different psychological reality, a different field, collective field of consciousness than those when we were born before this transition takes place. This is a transition not simply of individual lives, but individual lives are catalyzing a transition taking place at the collective psyche. And in this process, we are giving birth to an extraordinary, beautiful being. It was one of the great privileges in my journey that at various stages in the end stages of the journey, I was taken deep into the future, deep into what I call deep time, and was given the experience, allowed to experience the form of the future human, the being that we are trying to become. It's hard for me to describe this being without crying, because this being is so beautiful, this magnificently beautiful. A human being with its heart completely healed of all the wars and trauma of history, a being whose mind is completely open to the divine consciousness, whose creativity is a drinking in of the creative powers of creation, manifesting inside time and space. And this, of course, even once we make this transition, and this is not something that's going to happen in a few years or even in a few decades. I mean, I think of this as a generational transition. It's going to involve generations to make this pivot. And when we do make this pivot, when the diamond soul has been born in history, nature is not going to stop there. The creative intelligence of the universe is not going to stop there, of course. It's going to keep going. We're going to be here for millions and billions of years yet. But this is simply a transition into the next stage of our long story of human development, of human evolution. This is the work of the hour, I think. This is why we are all here. This is why past life therapists are so needed, because human beings are experiencing this tremendous sort of upwelling of darkness, an upwelling of pain, an upwelling of trauma coming from their previous lives. And all of us are experiencing this upwelling of this past, of our individual and our collective past. And we need to clear this out of the system. We need to heal the system in order to make way for the infusion of divine energy, which is taking place at a deeper level. And it's actually the infusion of the divine which is driving these toxins out of the system. And that's why we need so many healers to help this process, to help us get ourselves, keep ourselves open, keep ourselves clear, so that we can then facilitate a deeper incarnation, a deeper manifestation of the divine creativity inside time and space, inside our very being. My sense is that all of us have chosen to participate in this process. We all knew what we were getting into before we were born. We all saw what lies ahead. We saw the tumult that we were coming into, and we all chose to be part of it for our own individual development, to take advantage of the accelerated evolution that's happening, but also for the species development, for our children, for our grandchildren, for our great-grandchildren, and also for the divine itself. We chose to be here, and we entered with the specific skills that we chose to bring to this particular challenging time. Teachers, doctors, healers, therapists, artists, politicians, all the skills needed to facilitate this profound transition in human culture. Collective reincarnation, the birth of the diamond soul in history. This is our work. Thank you very much. Now, let's get to the best part. Let's get to the question and answer and dialogue. That's what I enjoy the most. Thank you. Now, I'm waiting for someone to bring the questions from the chat, or from anyone in the audience to bring the questions or their thoughts, or sharing their thoughts in response to what I've been talking about.
Hi, my name is Michael Morrisman. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Okay. Oops.
I see you, Michael.
Okay. Now I'm looking at a little camera. This is something I thought I promised I wouldn't do when I make a statement instead of question. But you know, I'm a Jungian analyst, and in what you said gave so much meaning and texture to a lot of what I've read. And I don't know if you're familiar with Jung's, one of his last works called Mysterium Conjunctionis.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to be what he's talking about. You know, there's a phase where in alchemy, where the mind and the spirit and soul unite outside the body, and then the spirit and the soul join the body, And then finally, the spirit, soul, body join and become part of the world as one. It's called the unus mundus. And what occurred to me in listening to you is that the unus mundus isn't just taking place in a moment, that you become one in the moment of the world, but that it's one with the whole history of existence. So it's multidimensional in that way. And a colleague and I were speaking yesterday about the state of the world, and one of the phases in alchemy is called the mortificatio. It's the dead, before there can be a rebirth. It's the mortification, the deadening, the rotting, and we realize that, or we conjectured that this is sort of where we are culturally, where what's going on seems to be a kind of deadening, the kind of mortificatio of civilization in this way. And how do we hold that? And then, with rebirth, you have to go through the death first. You can't think of death and rebirth, or else you don't really experience the death.
Yeah.
This seems to be, in some way, what I hear from what you're talking about. You had an encounter with what Jung called the self, but when Jung talks about archetypes, it's not just archetypes or just the self. It's something that transcends anything we can possibly experience. And it was so exciting to hear you articulate this experience. It was really very moving and exciting. And in the concept of a world, the totality of reincarnation was really very, I was going to say enlightening. Thank you. So I don't know if there's a question in there, and I'm sorry for going on and on, but it's just very excited to sort of share these impressions. So thank you.
Michael, I completely agree with you. I mean, the old man saw so much, didn't he? He really understood the dynamics. He's been such a companion to me on the psychedelic path, because before I met Stan Grof, I met Carl Jung's work, and I deeply internalized his work with much joy. And then I carried his courage, I hope, into my own psychedelic encounters. And I feel much correlation between what unfolded in my work and what he did. And the extraordinary thing, he did it all with simply the power of his naked consciousness. He didn't use the amplifiers of psychedelics the way I did and others have done. He did it all by the power of his own being, his own personal unamplified being. Truly a great accomplishment.
Chris, we have a question. We are facets of the diamond soul. Do you have a name for the human species we are becoming?
Many people have, I think what I'm articulating is something that many people intuit, many other people have articulated, and they've reached to give it different names. Some people call it Homo Noeticus, the knowing human, in contrast to the thinking human, or Homo Spiritualis. And I am open to all of these names because I really love the intuition that's behind them. I don't have a particular name for it. I simply refer to the birth of the future human, the birth of this higher form of humanity that's emerging. But when someone asks me, what is the form that the future human will take? That's when I turn to this concept of the birth of the diamond soul, because the form of the future human is already embedded in our history. It's already embedded in the soul's history, in the soul's past. So it represents a culmination of our reincarnational history and this integration of that history into the birth of this higher consciousness. But what shall we call this higher consciousness? What might we call it? It's a dimension of being. I think we see signs of it in our great spiritual leaders and our great incarnations in the Christs of history and the Buddhas and the prophets of history. We see hints of this larger consciousness emerging, these prototype that they show us. But what can we call it? I'm happy to let history let us emerge in time.
Chris, we have another question for you. Have your experiences of the human consciousness ever intersected with the collective consciousness of other non-human collective species consciousness? And if so, what was the result?
Yeah. You know, many people, individuals, and cultures, when they work in psychedelic states or this, and I understand psychedelics, of course, I should have said this earlier, simply to be an amplifier of consciousness. It amplifies what makes subtle in the distance. It makes what is very subtle, it makes it very loud. It makes what's far away very close. And when people work in these amplified states of consciousness, many of them, and it's very natural, they enter into deeper dialogue with and communion with the animal species, with the intelligence that's manifesting in various species of animals. And in the shamanic cultures, they talk about totems, you know, kind of, which I think of as kind of an archetypal representation of this species intelligence. Much dialogue with these species, much intaking and learning from these species and sharing. Now, personally, that has not been much of my experience. My experience has been focused on the human species. And when I've asked Spirit, why is that the case? Why was that the case in my work? The answer that kind of arises within me is that it is humanity which represents the greatest threat to all life on this planet. If we can heal humanity, if we can help humanity make this transition, awakened transition, then all the other species will be safe. And my work has been focused really on helping humanity through this transition.
All right, Chris, we have another question. Along with the evolution of consciousness, will there be physical DNA changes in the future, humans, so that disease and genetic weaknesses are eliminated?
It's an interesting possibility, isn't it? And I'm not qualified to answer any question about genetic changes or changes of our in that way. But let me share one experience that I think is relevant here. I've spoken of the future human in terms of an open heart, a healed heart, and of an open mind. But there is an entirely other dimension that was given me. It was actually the very, very last experience that was given me in the last hours of the last session after 20 years of work. And it's an experience that I call the diamond vision. I was resting it towards about 5 hours into the session. I was resting, I had my eyes open, I was in the room, and all of a sudden, my vision became 1,000 times sharper than I had ever seen it before. I was able to see things I had never seen before. I mean, I saw the physical world, I was in the physical world, but I was seeing it with a diamond light kind of precision. I could discriminate shades of colors. I could count the leaves on the trees. I could see every pore in my hand and every hair coming out of the pore. It was just a hyper intense clarity, super clarity, so clear it just took my breath away. And then after about 10 minutes, it went away. And I was seeing in my normal vision. And I was amazed, how could you possibly see in such hyper clear vision and then go back into normal vision? And that's when I began what was given me to understand that what was happening is that I was seeing through the eyes of the future human. We tend to have a model of sensation perception in our physical senses that is very mechanical. It's biomechanical, chemical, and it's like certain electrons hit certain receptors and trigger certain nerve cells, and it's a mechanical process, and sensation and perception is kind of a mechanical thing. But I think that's it's true, but it's a radically incomplete understanding. This is something different. This is that the more consciousness is consolidated in our presence, inside our body, the more consciousness awakens and pushes consciousness to higher and higher levels of actualization. It changes not only our heart And not only our mind, but it literally changes our physical senses. All of our physical sensors are being taken into higher levels of register. So it's not just diamond vision, it's what you might think of as diamond hearing, diamond touch, sensation. The whole physical body is becoming more infused with light. And as it becomes more infused with light, our biology begins to function at higher and higher levels. So whether this will register in some type of genetic change, I don't know. Maybe if genetics are the encoding of our evolutionary past, maybe it is an encoding of our evolutionary, this will take place in our evolutionary future. But this I am convinced of, that in the process of bringing heaven to earth, and that I think is what's happening in the diamond soul, we are bringing more and more and more heaven into earth, on earth, in our incarnation. We are transforming earth under the increased infusion of spiritual energy, divine energy into the physical existence. In that process, our bodies are changed, are being changed. Our bodies will be a different body in the future than they are now. How far might this go? If we take it further, what will happen as we become more and more and more conscious within this body? We might get some glimpses if we look at some of the great spiritual saints in history, what some in the Buddhist tradition they call the Mahasiddhas, the great beings that are not only an enlightened being, but a great enlightened being. And we see that around them, the laws of physics seem to break down. They are capable of doing what we would call miracles, but is really just the natural manifestation of greater consciousness being focused by their individual intention, manifesting in miraculous phenomena around them. And their bodies are very different. I mean, there is the story of one of Neem Karoli Baba's. This is the Ramdas's guru in India, and Neem Karoli Baba was seen at a wedding and participated in a wedding of one of his disciples, and he was there and everyone enjoyed his presence, and they did not know that he had died 3 days before. How is that possible? What are the limits of human evolution? I think we see glimpses here and there.
I think that follows into a good next question. What is the purpose of the physical realm as opposed to the spiritual realm?
Well, the spiritual realm manifests the physical realm. The spiritual realm manifests this world. And I think when we really look at the enormity of the physical universe, when we look at the enormity of the human story, I think we have to be satisfied with only being able to catch glimpses, because no matter how profound our glimpse, we're still only catching glimpses of the larger story. And we've only been kind of catching this larger story for maybe 5,000, 6,000 years. And that's just the beginning of it. Within the context of the birth of the diamond soul, the physical existence is a very, very dense layer of existence compared to spiritual reality. And its density is a great advantage to us, because when we can manifest our creative capacity inside physical existence, we have achieved something which is much more demanding and much greater than manifesting our creative capacity in the subtler realms of spiritual existence. It is, as it were, physical existence is like the weight that barbell that athletes use to strengthen their muscles and to become stronger. And they don't blame the barbells. They use the weight of the barbells to become stronger themselves. And I think it's something like that, that physical existence is very dense, but it's a very, very demanding training ground that it gives us the opportunity to focus our understanding, focus our mind, focus our consciousness, and to learn how to manifest inside time and space, to learn how to create the world that we want to create, and not a world which is where we have our demons of our past coming back at us and haunting us, but a world which is truly the manifestation of our highest spiritual ambitions, our highest spiritual gifts to the world. When we can do that inside time and space, then whenever we return to spiritual reality, we will be able to go deeper and deeper into spiritual reality than we had ever been able to go before. You know, I used to think of the bardo as an obstacle, all the layers of the bardo we have to evolve through before we achieve extra samsaric existence, extra bardo existence. And now I think of the bardo as actually a security blanket. Because when an individual consciousness returns to home, returns to source, returns to the diamond luminosity of the divine existence, if we are not prepared, if we are not really, really evolved and prepared, and if our diamond consciousness is not really clear, when we encounter just a portion of the intensity of divine existence, it shatters us. It just, how can we withstand the intensity of divine love, of divine intelligence? And this is in the physical reality, we become stronger, more integrated, more powerful, so that when we return to the divine presence, we can withstand a much more intense and greater measure of divine communion. And so I think in some ways, one of the great purposes of physical reality is to allow us to have deeper and deeper experiences of spiritual reality.
Thank you for the barbell metaphor.
Yeah.
All right, this is from Rico, and she wants to say, thank you, Dr. Bache. You helped me gain a better understanding of who we are and what we are and why we are here. So thank you. Thank you so very much.